Hey guys, it is Faerie Grace. We're in a very informal setting, but you have to start somewhere. And I want to interview historical people, people that are treasures, or people that do what they love in life. And today I have the honor of meeting Miss Helen. She is a historian, a reenactor. She basically anything historical, she knows about it. And I do want to say, if you're comfortable, you just had a birthday yesterday.
Yes, I did.
And how young did you turn?
78.
78.
Yes.
So happy birthday.
Thank you.
She's done things, all kinds of things,
Yes.
but what we want to talk about today, we're going to do several segments with her, is a lady named Sophia Cox. So give me, they say to really understand something and for someone else to understand it, say it as if you're telling an 8-year-old or a 3rd grader.
Okay.
So in bullet points, because we're going to do this 15-minute interview about Sophia Cox, a wonderful, powerful woman that I'm just very impressed with and very eager to hear more about her. Tell us, who was Sophia Cox?
Sophia Cox was a woman that was born in the 1800s.
1800s.
And her family was quite wealthy. And during that time period, when you got married, you had to turn over all of your money to your husband. He could do anything with it. He could gamble it, he could spend it on prostitutes, he could burn it, and you had nothing to say about it.
Wow.
Well, Sophia...
See, ladies, look how far we've come.
Yeah, Sophia decided early on that she wasn't going to get married because she wasn't turning over her money. She knew what she wanted to do with her money.
And what was that?
She wanted to help people. She was a true Christian woman, I will say. She was religious, she was religious, but not to the degree where she went out and preached it. She wanted to not preach religion. She wanted to preach charity. She wanted to give charity. And so every young man in Philadelphia, where she was from, would take one look at her and say, no, because she's not going to give us anything, and she refused to marry them. And she had a lot of money, so she was, people wanted to really they came after her. Well, then she met Eckley Cox. Now, Eckley Cox, which eventually became her husband, was very close with the family, so she knew him. I understand that Eckley was engaged to another woman at the time, and she died from some either diphtheria or something that had come along. So, and also he went to school in France and in Germany, and he spoke French, German, English, Spanish, many languages, as she did. She was very, very well learned. I don't know. She went to school in Switzerland, which I assume was a finishing school, because that's all it was at that time. But Sophia was smart. She was very, very smart. Well, Eckley and her got together, and she told him right off, I'm not going to give you any of my money. And he said, I don't want it. I've got my own. You can have it. They got married because she was now happy. And she made him put it in writing, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was not going to fool around with some guy.
She meant it.
Yeah,
she wasn't going to let anything change that.
Now, she was very, very quiet and very staid, had a very dry sense of humor. And Eckley was
I love her. I want to meet her. Do you reenact her, Sophia Cox? Because you do reenact a lot, right?
I have not, I've told her story, but I've not reenacted her.
Okay.
But he was very outgoing, very, very jovial. So they got along very, very well. They got married and they moved into where he was a coal baron in the Hazleton area, the anthracite coal. He and his family, he had 4 brothers, and they owned 50,000 acres in 5 counties.
Wow. And this was in Philadelphia?
No, it was up in northeastern PA.
Northeast, okay.
The anthracite coal area is that area in northeastern PA.
Okay.
And a lot of it was was grants from the king when they first settled over here early on, and they bought up a lot of land. Now, his forefathers or fathers before him, Tench Cox, which that name was never repeated again. Eckley was repeated many times, and Britain and all of it, but Tench only one time. So I don't know why, but he bought up all he could, and he told them. Tench worked with Hamilton to set up our monetary system for the federal government. And he had insider news. He knew there was coal. They weren't quite sure what to do with it, but they knew there was a valuable mineral underground. He bought up everything, so he really had insider information, which is insider trading today, but back then it was not. And he died poor with no money but a lot of land. And he told his family, do not sell that land. That land will make you millions, and it has, and it still continues to make them money.
Day, 2021.
That's right.
Wow, so he knew something.
He knew it was going to make them.
Wow.
So anyway, the Cox family, the brothers, got together, and they formed. One was an engineer, one was a lawyer. Eckley Cox had over 100 patents. He was quite the engineer, and others ran just a business, and they started putting together patch towns. And these are little towns where the miners had to live. They had to buy from the company store, which was exorbitant prices. Yeah, it was horrible actually. And the homes were just little nothing homes, 4 rooms, and the women of these towns really saved the men, because a lot of times when the men when it was cold and they couldn't go in, they couldn't transport the coal, they would be laid off. Well, the women took in boarders, they made things, they cooked, they kept the family together, which is very, very, in our history, is always the way the women worked. Even out west, the women went out there and settled the west because the men were running wild out there. So they went out and they got schools and churches, and so the women are always...
Way to go, women, making schools and churches,
the
keeping
women
the family together,
where
the men work hard.
Been the glue. That's what I call them, the glue that kept the family together.
Glue. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and they kept it going, but life was extraordinarily hard. Now, when Sophia came into the picture, she had this money and she knew what she wanted to do with it. She first of all set up the first home nursing event in this country.
Wow.
She would have a head nurse, like you would call it, I guess we call it today, that would be there, and the nurses would go out to the patch towns to see who needed help.
Oh, wow.
And she would make sure that the sick got taken care of, particularly the children and the women.
Yeah, because it was rough.
It was. Yeah.
My husband's working on a book, and there's some tragedies that he tells me about them, and I sit there and I cry in our kitchen, and I'm like,
it was horrible. A lot of it was horrible.
Sophia Cox really was even the glue there to heal these men of their spirit and body.
Let me tell you how bad it was. If a man died in the mines, they would throw the body on the porch. The women would have to take it in and clean it up, and they would have a mourning period, and then they would bury it. Immediately afterwards, the bosses would come and throw the women and the children out, unless the women married one of their boarders. So you would have a boarder in there, and if he didn't mind taking care of the children, they would get married immediately because they had to keep their house. Life was extraordinarily hard.
So you lose your husband in a tragic way, probably young, since most of them were young, working and dying. And then to keep you and your family in your home, you would just quickly marry
one of your boarders or somebody that was available. And if you did not, all of your furniture, everything you owned was thrown out in the street. And there were no places, there was no access cards, there was nobody to help you. The churches tried to help as much as they could, but you have to realize that you had immigration coming into this country in such a force that if one man, if he didn't like your work, go. They could put another person in your place immediately.
Everyone was replaceable.
Yes. And Sophia started with taking care of them, and she built a hospital for the. It was not very far across from the church that she also built. They built a hospital so that the men could be taken there. She gave the state hospital in Hazleton $10,000, which at that time was a lot of money.
It's a lot of money today.
So that a wing could be
Let
built.
alone back then.
A wing could be built so that, because they would not take the miners or the poor people into the hospital.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so she had this wing built and paid the doctors so they would take care of her people. She called them her people.
Oh.
In the wintertime, she would take fruit, anything at all, Don, and she would get into a buckboard, and literally, she was quite the horsewoman, but she into a buckboard Now, most women in her state would have had a driver and a carriage, an old buckboard filled with fruit and vegetables, and take it to the patch towns and distribute it. She was
So what do you mean by a buckboard? I mean, maybe other people are educated.
Okay.
What do you mean by
a
buckboard?
2-horse buckboard. It would be a buckboard with just with just a seat and an open back, and that would be filled with fruits and vegetables.
So she would ride it herself.
She would, take it, and her she did have servants in her house. The house she built was not the mansion that the others built. Mm-hmm. It was a nice, big Victorian home, but it was not a mansion. Anybody that comes into the house used to always say, "Oh, it's such a It's not a mansion. It's not like the other ones." You could see if you go into Jim Thorpe, some of the big mansions that these coal miners built. These barons, they wanted to show that their wealth. Her, on the other hand, she wanted just a house, a nice house.
Yeah.
And it's a big house, a big Victorian home, but it's not a mansion because she had other things she wanted to do with her money.
More important to her.
Then she would take care of all these people. Then during her life, she set up trust funds that to this day, I have no idea how it works because she died in 1926.
Okay, 1926.
And to this day...
So almost 100 years ago.
To this day, $200,000 a year goes out to people within a radius around the house that they call. For example, it's not like the government giving you ongoing. The only thing she does ongoing is she pays dentists every year to take care of children's teeth.
Today,
Today. She pays enormous amount to dentists.
So this woman that in about 5 years will have been in heaven for 100 years. Till this day, 2021, children.
Yes, still go to dentists. Yes.
Like I could cry. Like what a legacy.
Yes. And also she gives out $200,000 in charity. For example, if you would go to Catholic Social Services, and if you earn too much or they just couldn't help you, they would send you to the charities. It's called the Sophia Cox Charities.
Sophia Cox, after her name, Charities. Okay.
And it's run by the family out of Philadelphia. But they have a representative up in the area.
Okay.
And they would decide if they can help you. Now, what their help is, like if you're in the middle of winter and you run out of oil, they would make sure you got oil. But only one time. I mean, it's not an ongoing thing.
So they don't want you to be habitually needing them. They want you to use this blessing and get on your feet to do what you're meant to do and maybe become the next Sophia Cox.
They will get requests, for example, like they need a bed. For a sick person that will move, elevate, and and they will see that they get it. And so they do so much wonderful things. And I mean, I have seen the letters come into the house that are just, you want to cry when you read them. You help me, you save. And in fact, one gentleman came up to me when I first moved there.
I was going to say, you said you see letters come to the house. Yes. What do you mean by that?
Well, people from the charities, they will send letters to the Sophia Cox house thanking the charities. I would forward them on to Philadelphia or to the representative. But I would get them, and they told me to open them and see what.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but I had one gentleman come.
I want to move this over so I don't cut your shoulder off. There you go.
I had one gentleman come into the house, and he said, I have to tell you that if it wasn't for Sophia Cox, I would not be here today. Saved my grandfather's life, who then had children, and it went on like that. And people all over that's the way they felt about her. They called the Slovak people set a memorial up at the house, right out in the lawn. They called her the Angel of the Anthracite.
What does anthracite mean?
Anthracite coal is the anthracite region. So you're talking about a region, but they called her the Angel of the Anthracite.
It's so appropriate.
Yes.
She really was.
She really was.
To this day.
And she would just do amazing things. After she died, she left money available so that women who, like if you had surgery and it wasn't where nurses were there, but you needed a place to rest for a couple of weeks to rehab. You could come to her house and stay. And she had a cook, a housekeeper, and a person to drive. And then she had women, they called her the women of good character.
Oh, I like that name, women of good character.
They could come and stay.
I don't know if I could fit there all in that category.
Yeah, I don't know. Everybody I asked, what does that mean? They said they had no idea. They do know that she would have like miners' wives who never had a vacation. They could come and stay 10 to 2 weeks at her house, be waited on. And I talked to the one woman that before she died about what they did, and she said the most thing they wanted to do was get in the car and go for a ride in the country.
Oh.
And so they would take them all over. I would have dinner for them, and they could stay there. And that went on until 1972.
1972.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then they stopped it because pretty much most of the miners' wives were, things had changed and it wasn't really needed. And so the house really closed down after that. And I went along and said, okay, what are you going to do with this beautiful house? You know, it's just standing on 13 acres and nothing is being done with it. And so the family decided that it would be nice if I went in and did something with it. So I did. I went in, and for 5 years I made the house alive. In fact, I got responses from people when I was leaving that I brought life back to Drifton, which is a little community that the house was located in.
So the house is located in
Drifton, Pennsylvania.
Drifton, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's right outside of Freeland and Hazleton.
Okay.
In between, but it was also considered a patch town area. There's little towns there, Ebervale, all these little towns around in that area that were named after them. But after 9/11, Drifton became incorporated into Freeland for the post office.
Okay.
But the family did not want to move, did not want to change the address because that was her address. And I agreed with them.
I agree with them as well.
Yeah, and so
So you took over this house.
I took over the house
for 5 years.
For 5 years.
So was this the house she lived in?
Yes.
Oh my gosh! So
she
you
actually
got to live in the house of Sophia Cox.
Yes, she actually died, and so did Eckley. Eckley died in the house at 54 because of pneumonia.
Oh.
They didn't have any penicillin or anything, so he died of pneumonia.
Very young.
Very young. And everybody else, now, eventually all of the coal barons sold out their mines to other organizations, and so did the Coxes. But all of the families from the Coxes, remember there were 4 brothers, so they all lived around. They all moved back to Philadelphia.
Okay.
Now, Eckley had died.
Okay.
And Sophia said no, she was staying there. She stayed there. She went to Philadelphia once a year to buy Christmas gifts for 300 children.
Wow.
Every year, 300 children got 2 gifts, a practical gift and a toy.
Oh my gosh.
Now, let me tell you.
It's like something we still do today. So her spirit just permeates so many things, so many places.
And those people told me they got the gifts. In fact, I had actually had in the house a dollhouse that she had bought in 1905, I believe, and they gave it back to me, and I put it in the house and left it, there because of course it was gorgeous, and books. But she would keep such good records that no child received the same gift 2 years in a row. Now,
I'm just astonished.
Yes, this woman was really, really
brilliant.
An angel, and not only that, brilliant beyond compare. Because you have to remember, she gave $200,000 a year out. She gave money to MMI for scholarships for kids. She gave money to the Episcopal Church, to Lehigh University, and gosh knows what else. What she used to do was she would give you money. She didn't want anybody to know it was her.
Okay.
She would give you money and say, you give it to the church.
Oh,
and they would laugh, and they'd say she was the first one to launder money. Because she would never, but she did it because she didn't want people to know it was from her.
Which is also biblical. So she was a woman that knew her Bible and actually did something with it. Yes. She was the Bible in action.
Yes,
indeed.
and she was indeed a very, very, she was a Christian woman in every sense. She just believed that because she had this money, it was a gift from God, and that she should help people.
And she did.
And she did.
And still almost 100 years later.
And still doing it today.
Oh my gosh.
An amazing woman. Nothing has ever been written about her. And let me tell you a story.
I was going to say, because you were telling me about this house, Sophia Cox, and I'm like, wait, you can see very impromptu, humble thing, but because, Miss Helen, your history inside of you is a treasure. Is a blessing, and I just want to extract it. I'm so hungry to hear it. I never learned about Sophia Cox in school.
They had one gentleman who researched and was writing a book about her. He died.
Oh.
His son picked it up, and his son died.
Okay, don't write a book about Sophia Cox.
She did not.
Maybe she didn't want that.
No, she did not want that. Wow. What she wanted, she believed that it wasn't anything special she was doing. She was doing what God and the church and everything said she should do, or that she thought she should do.
Yeah.
And so she did not believe that it was anything special.
So, I mean, I don't want to believe in bad luck, but is there anything funny business about us not doing a tape on her?
I don't think so. I've talked about her repeatedly.
Because you also gave me a morning hat today.
I know. Yes, I did. But I used to do a whole thing on Victoria Morning. That's
Yes,
why I
which
gave you the morning
We
hat.
will
Yeah.
be doing that as well. We're going to get a little more better lighting and stuff.
But anyway, she was just an incredible person, and and that she just believed that that's the way you should do it, and she could not understand why others did not do it the same way.
I can that can actually resonate with me, and I don't mean that by any stretch of the imagination that I'm anywhere near her caliber, but simple things that I will do or something and don't think twice about. People will say, well, that's amazing, or these accolades, and you honestly don't understand. You're like, you don't do that, or you think that's special. It's not. It's just your breath and breathing. But she was to this whole nother level. It's like God knew she was going to do this. But here I have a question: how many other Sophia Cox do you think were meant to be women that God put in their spirit and their heart to do this? But let's face it, as you said, Sophia also had to have trust, faith, and boldness to stand up against what society would say, and then have a husband that would agree to it. But
at some point, when we talk about Victorian rules, and there were books on rules and regulations for the Victorians, they lived in a very, very box.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because during that Victorian era in England, nobody stepped out of the box, so you had less inventions, less people thinking outside the box. But for her, if you stepped outside that box as a woman, you were just you were shunned. You were no longer part of society. She didn't care.
She didn't care, and that's a true.
She did
free
not care.
Spirit and true.
Yeah,
she
was an incredible.
Everything. I don't even have a word for her.
I know.
She knew that. She knew if I step out of this box, I'm going to be shunned. Yet she had the boldness and I want to make the word brave something different, but she was brave to do that.
She was. But the other thing is, there's so many women in history that have done so much. If you research women, but nobody wrote about them because we weren't important in history.
Okay, so that is what we're going to do. You have the history of all these women that we don't know about. And believe me, I'm not a man basher. I have a husband I adore. I have 3 boys. Even the dog is a male. So that's not it. But I want to give homage. I want to give respect. So why don't we do that? Why don't once a week until we run out of topics have a interview about these women, these historical women that have changed life for the better, and you bring them back to life.
Well, they just don't talk about them. I mean, like Sophia, when I had my teas, I would have in between 15 minutes where I would talk about her and the house and the whole thing. And people would sit there and they'd say, we didn't know that. We've lived here all of our lives and we did not know that. And it's because nothing is written about it. Nobody writes anything about it unless the women themselves started. And she did not believe that she was doing anything special. She just believed that that's what she should do.
What she was meant to do, and she was.
Yes,
and she was.
And she was. She's very well known up there and very loved in that area. In fact, I have to tell you that in this house, I had hundreds of people coming through this house. One time, 300 people came through on a Christmas because it was all dressed up in Christmas. But I had all kinds of things around the house laying out like somebody had lived there. And do you know that during the whole time I lived there in 5 years, not one thing was ever taken from that house? And people would come in, 45, 50 people for a tea, and they're roaming around, the downstairs, and there's stuff everywhere. Glasses with the strings on them, to hook in your hair so you don't lose them. All sorts of things.
Treasures. Priceless treasures, relics.
And not one person, not one thing was ever taken.
Wow. What do you contribute that to? Because
I think out of respect for her.
Out of respect for her.
Most of the people that came through were women. Wow. They knew a little bit about her. I started to have a lot of Spanish women coming in because they were interested in what was going on there. Yes. Oh, yes. I have a tremendous hat pin collection.
Is this from her era?
Oh, indeed it is.
This is Miss Renee from behind the camera. This is her lovely home.
Yes.
That she wants to
Well,
show
I
us?
have many of these.
Okay.
As Renee will tell you, they're all across
Renee
my
is her
dresser.
daughter, by
Yes.
the way, if I didn't clarify
And
that.
they were the long ones. Now these were for the large hats.
Okay.
But when transportation started,
Okay.
the women had to
So
put
this
something.
is all authentic. This is
Yes.
what it actually.
Oh yeah, this is an
Okay.
authentic. They would put it through their hats and it would stick out. But when people started riding on buses or and everything, they would they could hurt somebody.
Yes.
So the law finally came out that they had to put something. They used to put eraser tips or corks
Okay.
on the end of little corks. I have some little corks.
Elementary school, when I lost an earring back, that's what we would do. So even back then, little eraser
And they weren't
tips.
allowed on the bus. Not allowed on the bus unless they had a tip on it. Yeah.
On there.
And that's when they started to get smaller. Then
Okay.
they made them smaller. Okay.
Yeah, because that is pretty. I mean,
Oh,
that's
yeah,
pretty
that's
much a
pretty
nail right there.
Yes,
You
look
could
at that. Those are
needle.
deadly. Oh yeah, they're
Wow.
huge.
They are. They can be deadly.
Yes. Well,
Now this container that it's in with these little
Yeah.
holes, is this also authentic?
Yes,
Or?
yes, this is
Wow.
authentic. This
So
came from,
what time era is this?
well, this is from the early 1800s. This
Early
came,
1800s,
This is,
okay.
I think, this is the beginning of the flow blue. You know,
I don't know what
okay.
Flow blue.
Flow
See how
blue,
much we have to talk
flow
about?
blue china is very, very valuable.
Okay.
And I have two things. One is from the 1700s. It is a cheese dish that is just gorgeous, which I have here. And that is also has that flow blue, which means a meshing of blues.
Okay.
They call it a flow blue, but there's a lot of flow blue now is something that's very collectible, or it was collectible. I didn't collect it, but I know that this is the beginning of it. And I've got a bunch of these hat pins because I've got so many hat pins. I always say I'm going to get rid of some of them, but you know what? They never
Hey, why
leave.
not? I mean, look at this one. I don't want to get sidetracked, and I want to end us soon. This is someone's initials, or
Yes.
was that a monogram? What do you
Yeah,
call that?
something like that.
So,
Yeah.
but this is authentic,
Yeah.
like someone really had.
Yeah.
This.
Yeah.
Sometimes
And the-
I just look at these and just want to go back and see a moment, someone wearing this, and
the black
so is
one,
this from Sophia's house, or is this you just collected?
I
over the
collected
years?
them over
You
the years.
collected
Yeah,
them?
I don't
This
know.
looks like a little marble or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Wow.
And these black ones were all for mourning. Now you have to remember, people
Okay.
died very, very early, and the women would have to go into mourning, which is an entirely different subject because.
So we'll do
Yeah.
a morning topic.
Yes.
We can do that.
And anyway, so Sophia lived until she was 85. She died in
Okay.
1926.
1926.
She died in the house, and she died a week after she had dedicated a new gym that she had built for MMI. The doctors did not want her to go up there because she was, I think her heart was probably just leaving out. And she said, no, she's going to go. And she came back, and a week later she died in the house. And everybody said, well, I lived there by myself in this great big Victorian home. Were there any ghosts there?
I was wondering that, but I
Yes.
thought we'd save that for another topic.
No, there were no ghosts
No
there.
ghosts.
Every night I'd come in if I was working, I'd come in late at night. I'd say, okay, Sophia, I'm home. Come and talk to me. Nobody
Never.
came and talked to me.
And do you know why I believe that? And this is theological
Yeah.
stuff, and I do want to end closely, but close this soon. There are familiar spirits,
Yeah.
and if someone dies, it's not really them. My father taught me this in the biblical
Right.
text. It's not really them that's the ghost or the spirit, but it's a familiar spirit, so it can come and look or
Yeah.
perceive to be that person. And in my belief, because I was wondering that, like, are there
Yeah.
ghosts in
Yeah.
this Victorian home where 2 deaths were? And for you to say living by yourself and even commissioning her that she could
Yeah.
come, and there was none, it is because we as believers believe once your spirit is not in your body here, it goes to be with the Lord.
That's right.
So she is nowhere
Yeah,
in that home, nor
nowhere.
her husband,
No.
because she is in glory. She is in
Yeah.
heaven, alive and well. So that's
And
really
also,
interesting.
I have to tell you, I have been in homes where I'd walk in and I'd sort of,
You can feel
I
them.
didn't care for the house. This
Mm-hmm.
house was the most friendliest house I've ever lived in. I lived there for 5 years by myself, and I have to tell you, there was not a moment in that house
You felt
that I
afraid.
felt afraid. I'd walk in, and all of a sudden, I get a smile on my face because I felt like I was home. She was that. I think when good people live in, and she was the only one that ever really lived there.
Mm.
So it was her house totally. And I think that when good people live in homes like that, it just the house reflects it. The house
Yes.
smiles.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
you
the
can
way I
feel
felt
that,
about
yeah.
her. I felt like when I walk in there, everybody say, "You walk in there at 10:30 at night. Aren't you afraid?" Nope. I don't even turn on the light half the time. I just walk in and I'd say, "Okay, Sophia, I'm home." Nope. No, okay, not tonight, huh? not going to come and talk to me.
She's in glory.
I would love to have her
That's
come and talk to me, but I think you're
amazing.
right. I think that I believe that when the spirit leaves the body,
You go right
you're
into
gone.
heaven. The
Yeah.
angels come.
Yes.
I know it from experience of people that
Yeah.
have. Even my mom, someone that saw her a few hours before she died, she felt that
Yeah.
presence. She felt that light.
Yeah.
And it says in Bibles that the angels come and they carry
Yeah.
you, so they are taken. And I'm not saying there's not other elements to that where like someone could be, there's so many
Yeah.
things. But I'm just saying in this particular
Yeah.
instance,
Yeah, there was
she was so connected with the Lord Almighty. She
that's
left
right.
and she had nothing to look back
No.
on this.
And everybody would ask me. In fact, I had even ghost hunters from TV that wanted to come into the
wow.
house.
Yeah.
I told them no.
Good for you.
I do not believe.
Good
I'm
for
sorry.
you.
I don't believe there was anything there, and I don't believe a Sophia would have
She
approved
would have
of
wanted
that.
that. No, she wouldn't.
No, she would not have approved of
well,
that at all.
you, Miss Helen, are a wise woman, and it has been an honor for
Okay,
me
thank
to
you.
speak to you. And I know, in my knowing nothing, that you were divinely appointed and chosen to take care of her house because she knew you had the kindred spirit. You honored everything that she
I loved
was.
her. Yes.
And you're honoring her today.
Yeah, she was an amazing woman.
Yeah.
When I think of her, I always get a smile on my
Yeah,
face.
when you were talking about it, I'm like, let's just throw this camera on and talk about
Yeah.
Sophia Cox. I mean, and I'm sorry, but can I say, women, if you're pregnant, which we know a lot of COVID babies are coming, would Sophia not be an amazing name to name your daughter? Like when you said that, I'm like that, and I told your daughter Renee when she told me, I'm like, what's this word you're saying? She's like, Sophia.
Yeah,
it's a name.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful name.
Yeah.
In closing, where does that originate from?
Probably from England. That's
England,
where her people were from. Was from
Okay.
England. Yeah, and they made their money on importing good wines into the country.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. They were wealthy, and in that time period, wealth married wealth. Always wealth married
I think
wealth.
to some extent
Yeah.
today too.
Yeah,
it's
I believe
pretty
so,
much
yeah.
a cultural thing that
Yeah.
parents would want
Yeah.
their children.
And so all of them married women, like her sister, who also had money from the father, married one of the Cox brothers. So that's how they all
okay.
knew each other. They were all very
okay.
connected. Yeah,
Aw.
yeah. And she spoke 4 languages. She was,
I can barely speak American English.
but she did amazing things with her money, which always amazed me. Because to this day, do you realize that she had to put millions away to get 200,000?
Every
The
year.
church gets. I'm not even sure how much the church gets quarterly, but it keeps it going.
Wow.
And the MMI gets scholarship money, and Lehigh University gets money, and there's the picture of her, yes.
Oh yeah, let's close with that.
That's
we
a
would
picture of
definitely want
her
to
right
honor
before
her.
she died.
Oh, right
Yeah.
before she died. So let's see if we can put this
Yeah.
out. Her little doggy.
Yeah, she loved dogs. She always had 2 dogs
I love
in the
dogs
house.
too. There's 3 dogs in this house.
Well,
surprised they're not in here right now. That's Miss Sophia Cox.
Yes, and let me
Before
tell
she
you,
died.
when I
Thank you,
moved
Miss
in there,
Renee.
they told me that I could not have any animals.
I think Sophia would have said no to that you should have
Yeah,
a dog if
but
you wanted one.
I had a lot of people coming and going, and a lot of very
Yes.
valuable furniture.
So
that-
it would be good
yeah,
not
it was
to
not.
risk
I
that.
agreed.
I
agreed. Yeah, I
agree
would not.
too.
Yes.
She may not. I think she would be like this. It's a lived-in house.
Yes.
Make it your
Yeah,
home.
probably.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
can definitely
Yeah.
see why you would
Yeah,
want
the
to do that.
furniture was gorgeous. The house was very, very nice. It was well appointed, not like a mansion like you would see, but very well appointed. And she, the library, which I had started out with putting the teas in the library only, had these marvelous book things all built in. I mean, it was a true library. And underneath it had these very thin drawers that pulled out because he was an engineer and he kept his things in there. It was just an amazing
I
history.
would love
Yeah.
to visit that house. Can people, if they wanted to, go visit the house?
I don't know now. Now that
Because
I'm,
you just left it, right?
yeah, I left, but I'm sure that they probably do tours of it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, but the other thing that's interesting is that in the library and in the music room were these windows that opened, and that is because during that time period you got taxed on every door, so you had walk-through windows.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, as rich as they were.
They were still saving money.
Yes.
And that's what people say. That's how they stay rich. 'Cause
Yeah.
So back then in the 1800s, you were taxed on how
doors
many doors
you had in your
so
house.
you had walk-in
Yeah.
windows.
And if you'll see a lot of that, particularly down south,
Okay.
where they have the windows, you can just go out into your patio or whatever.
Wow.
And that is because they taxed everybody on their doors. It's amazing, isn't it? And even these people that were so rich, and there were a lot of doors in the house. I mean,
I'm sure.
bedroom
It's
doors,
gigantic, yeah.
And she always kept, like, when bathrooms came in, bathroom was put in.
Okay.
One in the servants' quarters, one on the second floor, two on the second floor, and one down on the first floor. And it's just amazing. I mean, electricity came in. They went from coal, kerosene, gas to electric.
Wow, all in her lifetime.
Yeah, all in her lifetime, yeah.
And then she just, as soon as it came about, she had
Oh,
it.
yeah, she was very modern. She had the
Very
first
modern.
car in the area.
Oh,
And she
my
told the
goodness.
gentleman who used to drive her carriage, because she did have a carriage too, she said her driveway went all around the house. It was a big house, and it was a lot. And so she'd tell them, well, take the car and drive it around, learn how to drive, because they didn't have to have licenses then.
Oh, okay.
And he wrote down, he was scared to death of this thing. He liked his horses. He didn't like this car.
Yeah,
but
I could understand
he
that.
learned to drive it.
And he would drive her
Yeah.
around then.
Yes, then she would drive around to the patch
Aw.
towns. But she would visit everybody in the towns and go into their homes and bring them whatever they need and ask them what they needed. And she would help them, particularly the women and the children. The men, she helped to a degree, but her main
passion her
was
calling.
the family. Her thing was the family. She wanted to help the
them together.
family. And she also made it a rule at the time when she was alive that any child in the patch town could go to MMI, which was a mining mineral institute. Okay, for mining. But Eckley wanted to build this school so that he didn't have to call people from across the pond to come and be
Okay.
engineers.
So
He wanted to teach
educating
his
them.
own people to be engineers. And so anybody was allowed to go. Well, the men could go to the school too, but you have to remember, if you're working 12 hours a
Right.
day,
Yeah.
you're too
What do you have
tired.
left?
Yeah. But all of the children, now they started in the mines. I mean,
Young.
they started as a breaker boy
Okay.
at 9 or 10 years old, 8 or 9 years old. So they didn't really go to school at all. But he wanted to have them go after the work or before work or whatever. The only way they learned to read or write was if the women would teach them if they knew. And the women were very, very, they would find somebody that knew how to read and write
Okay.
and to teach their children, because they wanted their children to be better
So,
off
right,
than they were.
as any parent does even today.
Yeah. So
Well, Miss Helen, it's amazing. We're going to do these, like I
Okay.
said, maybe once a week, and we'll
Okay.
talk about a woman and some history
Okay.
and some story. So
yes.
I am Faerie Grace, and this is the amazing, talented, historical reenactor, writer of plays, and everything else you can think of, Miss Helen, and we are going to be meeting her once a week. I am Faerie Grace, and you are amazing.